lucky enough to find her materials online. This Friday is Mabon, the fall equinox. In the Wiccan liturgical year, it's a Sabbath, the second of 3 harvest festivals. As the midpoint of the harvest season, it's a celebration of balance, of acknowledging that much work has already been done, and that there is still much to do. It is a sacred time dedicated to reflection, refinement, and preparation. When we speak of the harvest, you may ask yourself, what ties do we have to a harvest festival in a pagan tradition when so few of us work the land anymore? Even those who grow small amounts of food in the backyard might have a hard time finding meaning in the metaphor of the immense amount of time and labor required for harvesting the fields of an entire village. And yet, I would ask you to think of your lives as the rich fields ripe for harvesting, and of this blessed community, the fellowship, as the village that collaborates on the harvest. This village, this church, is the place we have chosen to be our spiritual home. How many of us then actually treat it this way? Home is where we live our everyday. Home is where the little things pile up and threaten to consume us, just as much as the arrival of a child or the death of a loved one. Home is where people who love share those little burdens with us. Home is where the heart is, and the heart of this church is you. The fall equinox means that winter is coming, and though we may not have the extreme temperatures of Westeros, which is apparently a Game of Thrones reference, which I'm not that familiar with, the days will begin to shorten, and darkness will come upon us. Now is the time for us to gather around the warm hearth and strengthen our bonds with each other, so that we have the resolve to continue to build our bridges outward. This is the time to look forward to our warm indoor winter activities. For some of us, that means coffee houses, gaming groups, musical get-togethers. For some of us, that means crocheting, knitting, sewing, canning. For some of us, it means finally getting around to those indoor repair projects around the house that we've been putting off all summer.
What about the car?
But in many cases, it's a time when we draw closer together in our sacred spaces to share company with those we love. Many strong and beautiful bonds will arise from these endeavors and the other activities that this church has to offer. But in this economy of second and third jobs, or no job, sometimes Sunday morning is all anyone has to give us. What do we give back to them in return? What ministry can we offer them? How are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? This is the liturgy of small talk, the ritual of congeniality. Here at this church, when was the last time you gave an honest answer to this exchange? When was the last time you got an honest answer that you weren't expecting? We are each an individual soul with independent beliefs, but we each have chosen to be part of this larger congregation, a singular word. This congregation will live or die by our individual efforts. How much stronger, how much healthier would this congregation be if we expected honest answers during coffee and conversation and gave them in return? How much safer would you feel in this village if you believed you had the freedom to give honest answers when asked, how are you? We deliberately create a sacred space here in the sanctuary during worship. Let us make the grounds a safe space as well, where we can rise above that liturgy of small talk and take communion with each other. A great feast to celebrate the arrival of fall and the new program year is an excellent place to start, wouldn't you agree? One of my favorite things about fall is pomegranates. Not only are they tasty, but they're a plot point in the tale of Demeter Demeter and Persephone. Almost everyone's heard Demeter's side of the story. Hades takes a liking to Persephone, her only daughter, carries her away to the underworld against her will. Demeter stops doing her job, and then Persephone is tricked into eating the pomegranate seeds of the underworld to make sure she has to come back to Hades for half the year. It's a cosmological explanation for the wheel of the year, one that is interesting, but usually fails to speak to us on a spiritual level anymore. What I'd like to share with people is Persephone's side of the story, as retold by Ellen Dugan. In her version, Persephone is not kidnapped, but ventures into the underworld herself, drawn by the call of lost souls who need her help and love to ease their suffering. She has found her purpose, and she is content. But then she learns of her mother's grief, what it is doing to the world above, the land of the living, desolate, and fallow, with no source of nourishment. So she willingly eats the pomegranate seeds to force a compromise between the call outward and the call inward. It's a version of the myth that now serves a metaphysical purpose, and for me, it keeps the story relevant to modern life. It's now about maintaining the balance of ourselves while recognizing that the big picture will go on with or without us. We, like Persephone, must circle between a place of rest to bring ourselves back to life and our work in the world. We must surrender to the situation in order to most effectively bend it to our will. But it's not enough to understand the relevance of balance. We must also learn how to implement it in our own lives. One of the most important parts of the harvesting process is the separation of the wheat from the chaff. How many of us have come back from a vacation exhausted? We may have vacated our jobs and homes for a bit, but often we fill up our schedules with so many activities and people that we are doing nothing more than tipping the scale further. The fields are abundant, yes, but unless we actually take the time to harvest, we will get no nourishment from them. We must be able to look at ourselves and cut away that which will only wither and rot, so that decay and disease do not spread to that which feeds us. This is, more often than not, a deeply painful process. For many of us, it is especially painful when it comes to religion. We, as Unitarian Universalists, tend to ignore our previous religious paths that have left us wounded and hope that we will heal without tending. But not only do those wounds rarely heal over time without attention, but they affect our honest search for truth and meaning, one of the core principles of our faith. To quote Reverend Richard Trudeau, I have come to think that our congregations should not be so much decontamination chambers where people wash away their former religions, but rather workshops where they confront them. UUs are not alone in our liberal progressive outreach, but too often we let our hurtful experiences spread rot in our spiritual fields. We do not hesitate to engage the Islamic community to fight the prejudice created by the terrorists and fundamentalists who have usurped the name Muslim, and yet how many of us stand up for liberal Christians when someone claims Michelle Bachmann is what being a Christian is? How many of us are afraid to say that we even go to church? Our country is coming to a boiling point, and our silence is no longer acceptable. When someone declares that religion is a source of evil, that it should be eradicated because it causes wars and persecutions, how many of us tell them our own stories, our tales of love and compassion, and how our 7 principles can transform hearts as all religious truths do? What would you say if you were given the pulpit preventing you from telling your stories, as deep and personal as they are, to each other on the patio as opposed to from up here. We are the living embodiment of what it means to be a you and to give life the shape of justice. How does that fit into who you are? What is holding you back from coming into your whole self? The tale of Persephone, the symbolism of the harvest, both remind us that something must always die so that something else may live. Do not be afraid to let go of that which weighs you down. Make the time for your personal harvest, and you will learn what makes your heart sing with joy, and the world will be better for it. Knowing both your strengths and your weaknesses means that you can walk into Jericho Road and give them the best version of yourself. We all have an obligation to prepare ourselves holistically, not just for the good fight, but for the long fight. And I want to be clear that this is not talking about taking a break from social justice outreach for a few months. We, as a society, cannot afford that. This is about letting the shorter days and longer nights remind you to take stock of who you are, what you stand for, and what will make you an even better warrior for righteousness. This is about making sure we remember to take care of ourselves, so that after the trials of everyday life, work or the lack thereof, children, errands, chores, we still have something left to give to those who need our help. The bigots and the racists have control of the noise machine, and the only way we can drown them out is to say loudly and proudly, we are Unitarian Universalists. We know who we are. We are standing on the side of love, and we are not alone. Harvest the stories of your fellow congregants. Between now and the last Harvest Festival, separate your stories, the things that make you who you are, into wheat and chaff. Remember that both come from the same plant, and Mother Earth has shown us we do not need to throw away everything for the sake of one thing. Learn the language of God, of the Spirit of life, as it is used by the souls sitting around you here today. Reclaim testimony and witness as words that you use can be proud of in talking openly about our free church and blessed community. Look at our candles before you and see them for what they are: joys, sorrows, memories, hopes, all belonging to the people sitting around you right now. The equinox is here. Darkness is coming, and the light we carry in each of us will be what sustains us until the return of the light at the winter solstice. We need this kairos, this set-apart time, to rejuvenate us for our work towards justice and equality. Thank you.
Very nice. Good selection. Thank you.
And to follow up, our responsive reading on the back. Just 1 second.
What was that word you just used, Kairos?
Yeah, it is Kairos, I believe. Kairos. It's something I've not seen before.
I wonder if anyone has an example of the chaff that they would do away with from their own activities, their own being.
Let's hold that until after the responsive reading.
Okay.
We can discuss it.
Okay.
Let religion be to us life and joy.
Let it be a voice of renewing challenge
connection with things that are, which bids us serve more eagerly the true and right.
Let it be the sorrow that opens up the way of sympathy, understanding, and service to suffering humanity.
Let religion be to us the wonder and lure of that which is only partly known and understood.
An eye that glories in nature's majesty and beauty, and a heart that rejoices in deeds of kindness and of courage.
Let religion be to us security and serenity because of its truth and beauty, and because of the enduring worth and power of the loyalties which it engenders.
Let it be to us hope and purpose, and a discovering of opportunities to express our best through daily tasks.
Religion uniting us with all that is admirable in human beings everywhere.
Holding before our eyes a prospect of a better life for humankind, which may help to make it happen.
Thank you. So do we want to have some discussion? I mean, I know that this was, when I found this piece, I was a little uncomfortable with it because it speaks pretty deeply to me regarding especially the religious aspects and not wanting to even claim that I have a religion. That's hard for me. And turning my back on my past, which I think speaks to a lot of you as well. So that was a little hard for me to engage in, but I thought, well, I mean, how could that be more perfect since it's something that I struggle with as well? Why not share it with the congregation? What are your thoughts? It is.
Seby, just an observation. I find that you embody so much of you, and so much of this fellowship, and that I consider to be my religion, and this is a second home for me.
Absolutely.
People sitting around the room, I consider part of my family, my extended family, and
Absolutely.
are very dear to me. And I told Bev Kenray one day when I was at her home, that she and Tom were the most authentic people that I knew. They lived their faith. They lived UU principles. And everything that came out of their mouths supported that. And, you know, that's my goal, you know, is to live an authentic life in which the principles, and when I think nasty thoughts about 45, I think, be a good you. How can we reframe this?
Don't forget, part of being a good UU is action.
It is, and resistance will overcome. So, just an observation on you, Sarah.
Thank you, April. That's very sweet.
And the family is like Philip and my dad.
And they are part of
It's
mine.
like open-mindedness, people's closed-mindedness, when I do think there's nasty thoughts, you gotta remember that everyone has their own point of view, and sometimes we just can't change those people, and we need to be accepting of them for who they are.
Right. And also, in 2 weeks, we will have the pleasure of Detlef's brother actually giving us a presentation. And I've mentioned it before, he and his wife are devout Christians. They have spent the last 28 years in Africa being missionaries. And I will tell you that the message he's bringing us here is about some of his insight and journey, spiritual journey, of having lived in Africa and how it has changed them. very negative opinion about missionaries in Africa, for example. People would talk about a missionary in Africa, and I was like, oh, you know. But after knowing these people, I absolutely know that it's not their religion that brings a place of love or hate or using people. It's who they are, because these are wonderful people. These are wonderful people. I think you guys will really enjoy the presentation. Also, next week, we will have a Zen Buddhist teacher joining us to give a presentation on Zen Buddhism. And he is hoping to see who might be interested in having a regular meditation meeting here.
Good, right.
So that should be interesting. I've told him we're definitely open to the idea if we have people who want to participate. That would be great. Any other discussions or thoughts? All right then. Rick?
Let there be food.
Not for extinguishing the chalice. Should I extinguish these first, you think? The candles? First or after the chalice? What would be the?
Chalice first.
Okay.
Then after.
We extinguish the chalice here, that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Seby.
And how do you guys feel about the candle idea? Apparently that's something that other,
I really like that.
I like it too.
you guys like it? Well, we will implement that. We have the candles.
It feels cleansing to me. Especially when you're extinguishing them, you're not supposed to blow them out, Seby.
No, that's disrespectful to the candle,
Okay.
to the elements.
Thank you, somebody.